Այսօր ես իմ քայլն եմ անում ընդդեմ Սերժ Սարգսյանի երրորդ ժամկետի եւ ընդդեմ ՀՀԿ-ի։ Գնում եմ Երևան ազատության հրապարակ։ Ես մտածում էի, որ պետքա ոչ թե մի իրավիճակ ստեղծել, որ թաղայինը ծեծի քաղաքացու դուռը, այլ քաղաքացին ծեծի իշխանության դուռը։
Շախմատը երևի աշխարհի ամենաարդար խաղերից մեկն է։
Was he looking at the region and he thought, well, it worked for Putin, it could work for me?
As Sarkisian prepares for his new role as all-powerful prime minister, critics say that this post-Soviet country is on the brink of dictatorship.
Այն ինչ որ մենք պիտի այնպես անենք, որ չլիներ, եղավ, հետեւաբար ինչ ենք անում։ Ուրեմն Հայաստանի Հանրապետության բոլոր քաղաքացիներին կոչ եմ անում դուրս գալ փողոցներ, փակել միջավայրային բոլոր ճանապարհները։ Ժողովուրդ, ես իմ քայլը անում եմ, արեք ձեր քայլը։
An incredible eruption of civil disobedience on the streets of Yerevan has hundreds of thousands.
Ժողովրդական թափշա ոչ բռնի հեղափոխություն։
Ես եկել եմ այստեղ քննարկելու ձեր հրաժարականի պայմանները։
Hey everyone, welcome to the screening, or to the discussion actually. It's an honor to be leading the screening. This has been a film that has really touched me deeply. The film has done really well on the festival circuit. Got clobbered a little bit during COVID, our distribution plans, but we can get into that in a little bit. But you know, I've been making documentaries for a very long time. And my friend Serge Tonkian, you know, asked me if I wanted to help out on this one. I was a little dubious at first, but then I saw some footage and was absolutely blown away by it. And especially in these times, I thought the message of the film was extremely important. So I'm really honored and touched to be leading this conversation. Let me introduce the team behind this film. We have director Garin Havnasian, Serge Tonkian, who is the executive producer and composer, and badass musician and somebody I admired for a long time. Producer Eric Israelian, with whom I had the pleasure of making another film called Intent to Destroy, and producer Alec Mohibian. A lot of IANs on the end of those names there, but anyway, glad to be here. So let's just start with the basics. Garin, how did this film get going? How did this get started?
Well, first, I want to thank everyone for being part of the audience today and engaging in conversation with us. Thank you to our host, No Studios, and to Milwaukee Film for making our film available for another 2 days if you're interested in watching it. And Joe, thank you for not only being a moderator today, but you know, being a proper executive producer on our film. Not in name only, but from the very beginning, not waiting for the film to be good, but actually joining forces from the very beginning and helping it become good and becoming the special film that it has become. It really means a lot to us.
Oh, thank you.
You know, you've been one of the filmmakers we've admired through your own kind of iconic work, you know, Some Kind of Monster and the Paradise Lost trilogy. And it's been an honor now to work together and to bring this very special and very inspiring story, you know, out of Armenia to the audience. It means a lot to us, obviously, as Armenians, because this isn't just a film to us. It's a culmination of decades of dreaming and loving and struggling and failing and struggling again to bring democracy to Armenia. Armenia being a tiny post-Soviet state, a nation on the other side of the world, to which we've all on this call dedicated our lives. I myself was born in Los Angeles, but in the late 1980s, my father made a big decision on behalf of our entire family and decided that we were to move to the other side of the world, to Armenia, which was then Soviet Armenia. So I actually spent my childhood in Armenia, and I've been living and filming and working in Armenia for the vast majority of my life. That's where I live to the present day. And ever since Armenia became free of the Soviet Union in 1991, we've had domestic problems of democracy. We've had our homegrown dictators and our homegrown authoritarian regimes, which we've been trying to struggle against and replace with more democratic values. So the idea of filming democratic struggle wasn't new for me. Every time there had been a protest out on the streets of my apartment in Yerevan, Armenia, over the last 20 years, I picked up my camera, I'd gone downstairs, and I joined the protests without thinking a second thought. Now, inevitably, these protests had failed, and they failed again and again and again and again, all throughout my childhood and all throughout my filmmaking life. And so, you know, when on Easter Sunday of 2018, a guy with a backpack went on Facebook Live and announced a ridiculous plan that he was going to walk across Armenia and inspire a mass peaceful movement to topple an all-powerful kind of oligarchic regime. This, to me, was just the latest incarnation of a struggle that had lasted for decades. I had no idea then what would soon become very obvious, which was that this wasn't just the beginning of yet another protest. This was going to be the beginning of the culmination of the entire story, a spectacular revolution that would almost rise to the level of myth out of Armenia, which is, over the course of 40 days, the impossible story of a man who was able to inspire a nation, and a nation which ultimately exploded with democracy and was able to do a really impossible thing. So I hope that you know, this conversation serves as an introduction to many of the people in this Q&A to this beautiful country of ours, which we may know about through history from maybe the genocide that happened 100 years ago, but now we can also know as a country that is capable of creating positive stories and inspiring stories and changing the narrative from tragedy to triumph.
Great. Serge, I should say.
Yes, sir.
You know, many people know you as the lead singer of System of a Down. Whoever doesn't know that doesn't know anything about music. Also, you're an incredible, you know, solo artist.
Thank you, brother.
But you were an activist, you know, before even before being a musician. You know, tell me about the role of music, the role of activism, and the message of this film. You know, why did you get involved?
I got it. It's quite interesting. First of all, when the revolution was going on, we were all every Armenian around the world in the diaspora was following. We were glued to our computers, following it, and the whole revolution was streamed live on Facebook Live, and so it was very interesting to watch from an activist point of view to see this unfold. And the most incredible thing about what happened in Armenia, which most people don't know, and this film has like this incredible mystical key to unlock that, is that they accidentally stumbled upon, I should say, decentralized civil disobedience as a tool for change, nonviolent change. They practiced it wholly during the revolution. And that is after multiple failures of not being able to really ignite the people and into joining them. They stumbled upon this kind of technique where they would go and cross streets everywhere, block streets everywhere in the country and not allow cars to pass, totally nonviolent. And it worked. It brought the regime that was a post-Soviet oligarchic corrupt regime to its knees. And I always thought, as an activist who's an artist, I always thought, man, if people in Hong Kong could see this film, if people in Chile can see this film, if people in Belarus could see this film, and people in the United States can see this film, the idea of civil kind of a civil revolution, a peaceful revolution, can completely change, because it is a technique that is unbeatable. And there was not a single person who died during the revolution in Armenia in 2018, and the whole oligarchic regime was changed to a progressive democratic system. It's really, especially being an Armenian with such a dark, melancholic history, with not a lot of good news for us, this has been one of the few kind of shining moments that have been really positive and incredible, and a lesson to teach the world.
Right. Eric, Australian, is a good friend of mine. We made Intent to Destroy together about the Armenian Genocide. But Eric, you know, you're not just a film producer, you're a doctor, a medical doctor, and an entrepreneur and philanthropist. Tell me about your involvement in this and how you managed to do everything in a day. You know, juggle all your responsibility. You have a documentary coming out on Pope Francis. It seems like you really are carving out time in your already very busy life. If you weren't already, you know, doing other things, it seems like you get involved in projects that have, you know, a message.
Well, thank you, Joe, and it's an honor to be here with all of you, and I appreciate everyone watching this Q&A. And you know, I've really learned from incredible friends like yourself. You know, I think storytelling is something we've been doing as human beings for centuries, and I think the film medium is an important one now in this day and age to be able to potentially tell a story and have some sort of social impact. I think, you know, Intent to Destroy, obviously working with you was an honor of a lifetime, as well as with Serge, because we combined that with The Promise and used those two films to be able to lobby legislators to ultimately recognize the Armenian Genocide in the United States. And there are lots of other examples of how films can have such an impact. For this story particularly, I Am Not Alone, I think, you know, we use a documentary genre to tell this story. And I think it was an important and historic time period for Armenia. And that's one of the things I love about the documentary genre is that, you know, you kind of start filming and the story takes you in various directions, you know, which is very different, obviously, than the scripted films. And I think that we hopefully can inspire people to look at how the power of individuals coming together can do something historic. And I think that, you know, whatever happens in Armenia, this was an important moment in time in 2018. And I think the film captures it beautifully. And it's an honor to kind of work with friends towards a common goal. And I think that it's something that it's important to me. I mean, I've been involved in storytelling my whole life. You know, I studied English in college, and I've always written. And I think that filmmaking is an important way for us to hopefully move people to make the world better.
Great. Now, Alec, you're a producer on the movie. Tell me about why you got involved, and also how you know, how it's done. You know, I will say when I was very proud of the film when I saw the final version of it, but I did have doubts that it would connect with an audience because of the language issue. But it seems to have, you know, connected. So tell me about A, your involvement in the film, and B, you know, what it was like on the festival circuit and how people have reacted to it.
Thank you, Joe. Well, yeah, as to A, much like Godin, whom I've known since the 7th grade, when we met as the only two Armenians in a big public school in LA called Paul Revere. I've been involved in the struggle for freedom in Armenia with him, both creatively and very explicitly politically, as much as I could be, and as a journalist, going back since I first stepped foot there, which was 2003, and then really starting in earnest in 2012 with the parliamentary elections then. And it was a matter of, to me, as somebody who who's a Western Armenian, meaning that my folks are descendants of genocide survivors, and I didn't grow up in Soviet Armenia. I was born here in LA, Little Armenia. I felt like Armenia was a stage for really one of the great cosmic political struggles in the world. It seemed to me like everyone in Armenia wanted something and couldn't get it. They wanted freedom, they wanted self-respect, and they wanted self-governance. They had no idea how to achieve it, and it seemed increasingly impossible. I mean, I spoke with hundreds and hundreds personally with Armenians in Armenia of all ages over the course of years, and it was truly heartbreaking how frozen they were in their condition. We could call it a post-Soviet condition. I think it's familiar to other post-Soviet countries as well. And I saw people who loved their country, who loved their nation, who loved their heritage, but who had no choice but to dream of escaping. And it was the saddest thing that I've ever experienced. So I pretty much devoted my 20s to this battle one way or another, creatively and otherwise. And it was typically met with silence, defeat, and despair until 2018. So when this broke out, one of the most remarkable things about it from the beginning, I think, or from the moment that it seemed like it was going somewhere. When I say it, I'm talking about the protest movement that ultimately succeeded and that we made our film about, which began on Easter Day and which concluded exactly 40 days later with a completely powerless activist marching on his own, turning into the next prime minister of Armenia. It's kind of mind-blowing even to describe as a log line, you know. So it was evident from the beginning that this thing proceeded exactly along the lines of a typical 3-story film, the kind you read about in the screenplay books. It had a beginning, middle, and an end. It had a dark night of the soul. It had multiple dark nights of the soul. It had the moment where you think that, oh yeah, the guy, he did what he could. They made an achievement. They got far, but they can't cross the Rubicon. That's impossible. And I don't even want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the film yet as to how it all comes to be. But for me personally, and for Gotti, and I think I can speak for him, and I will, even if I can't, it was a vindication of pretty much the entire young part of our adulthood. And it's especially been heartwarming since the film premiered at TIFF, Toronto in 2019. It was runner-up for the Audience Award up against all these big, studio-backed docs. It won the Audience Award at AFI Fest. It won the Audience Award at Doc NYC out of 300 films. It played in another, dozen great festivals. It won awards at just about all of them. And it was really, audiences everywhere from New York to Omaha. It won in Omaha. That was the part that I think really touched me, was that no matter who was watching this film and no matter what their kind of political stance, national stance, heritage, they really, really connected with it because it's ultimately a story about the triumph of the human spirit and the triumph of the underdog, the ultimate underdog. The underdog who is both personally powerless and, in a sense, like civically and nationally powerless. So audiences have been connecting with this really well. Unfortunately, a little thing called COVID happened, disrupted our theatrical release, which would have happened in April. We were in very, very deep talks with a certain global streamer for a global release. We couldn't agree on a release date. It kind of fell through. Won't get into that. But, so we find ourselves kind of still seeking distribution in the year 2021. But what we do have is the immense, I think, support of the audiences who have seen the film on the film festival circuit. There was going to be another dozen film festivals after that got canceled by COVID all around the world. We have a lot of people who really believe in this film, and ultimately this film is starting to take on something of the underdog story arc of its subject matter, of Armenia and of the Armenian people. So we hope that those who watch it believe in it strongly enough to support it in the awards realm, and we'll figure out how to get it out to the world this year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've I've shown many films at film festivals over the years, and the response that this film has gotten from audiences is really incredible.
I agree. I think there's a bit of a sound coming from
Yeah,
somewhere.
there's a weird technical thing happening because I'm not on screen.
Let's see if anyone behind the scenes can.
All right, let me just throw a question to you, even though it seems like it's been fixed. Gadin, obviously, if people know Armenian history, that things have changed since the movie ended. The war, there was a war, and the country, suffered a loss of territory. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? And does that impact, the message of the movie, or
No, that's a great question. I mean, I think to begin, to kind of set the framework with which we have to answer any such question is that when you make a political film, or not a political film, a film about politics, or a film about a political figure, you have to make that film on the assumption that the film kind of never ends. When the credits scroll, history actually continues. And we know that the pattern of politics and the habit of history is such that rulers rise and fall, empires rise and fall, and nothing is fixed and nothing is final. And so I think what a proper or an intelligent filmmaker on a political subject matter has to do, and I think what our team rallied around doing, is to make sure that we were being very smart about the film that we were making. As you know, Joe, kind of 80 minutes into our film, fireworks go off in the center of Yerevan, and there's this great, like, Spielbergian triumph, where we could have easily ended our film. And maybe that was, from an emotional kind of perspective, the right kind of Disney finish to the film. But the film actually doesn't end there. The film goes on for another 10, 15 minutes. And whether kind of the audience member notices it happening, the filmmakers, regardless of our being on the side of the revolutionaries the whole way through, as soon as the revolutionaries come to power, we very silently actually kind of switch perspectives. And for the last 10 minutes or 15 minutes of the film, we bring in voices of the former regime and the current opposition who start warning the revolutionaries who've just come to power, telling them that, don't be arrogant. Your days are numbered. You have to protect the freedom that you've won. So I think in approaching a political film, you have to operate on an assumption that things are going to change, inevitably going to change. And what changed for Armenia after the film, through no direct kind of fault of the revolutionaries, or not because of any betrayal that the revolutionaries kind of realized against their own principles. Armenia's neighbor, Azerbaijan, which is a very oil-rich, quite sinister from a human rights perspective, adversary of Armenia, invaded the Armenian territory of Artsakh or Karabakh, and Armenia suffered a serious, brutal, heartbreaking defeat during that war. And so while the revolutionary government is very much in power in Armenia, there is a new sort of call from the people to hold them responsible for essentially suffering a loss in this war, not for betraying any of the kind of
a loss of territory.
Right. Exactly. Loss of territory. So again, it's a complicated situation. One thing that is clear, and one thing Armenia has had to its advantage, is I think, the revolutionaries who came to power, the democratic revolutionaries, have been on a sincere quest to uproot corruption from the country. It's not like, this isn't the kind of story where the revolutionaries ended up becoming the corrupt kind of billionaires that they were trying to replace. But it is very much the idea that the political conditions continue to change. But I think this is all very normal. I think when you watch any compelling political movie, from Edge of Democracy to Winter on Fire to any, you kind of assume that things have to change. And also, just as an activist and as a citizen, I think by now we are cynical enough, or we're realistic enough to understand that freedom, like love, like faith, like all of these really fundamental human experiences, isn't the kind of thing that you achieve and then you kind of get to keep forever. Freedom is the kind of thing that you have to struggle to keep, and to keep vigilantly, and to guard, and to lose, and to gain again. And I think that the people on this call and the millions of Armenians who struggled their entire lives to achieve freedom know very well that the struggle for freedom is going to continue for Armenians and for the human species for as long as humanity exists. So I think, of course, it doesn't change the message of the film. The film is, the film remains a perfect parable of the explosion of the human spirit, of the fact that there's nothing impossible when a human being decides to change the world. If that individual is dedicated, if that individual is faithful, if that individual dedicates his or her life to the struggle of any cause, that cause can come to life. So I think these 40 days in Armenian history, regardless of all that came before it and regardless of all that came after it, can always serve as this reservoir to which we can return as Armenians, or as Americans, or as people across the world who are engaged in their own struggles, in their own countries, in their own cities, and in their own communities, to return and experience these 40 days and to see what is possible when you put your mind to a cause, to a positive and just cause, and you start walking. And that's really the great lesson that rises to this level of myth. You know, there are two ways to approach this movie, Joe, and I think we talked about it from the very beginning. One was, what do we do? Do we set Armenia in the context of, like, do we make this a smart film where we set Armenia in the context of post-Soviet states and analyze it within kind of East-West geopolitical reality and about Putin and Trump and everything? And yes, of course, that's all there. But at a more fundamental level, the phrase that stuck with me and the first words I wrote in the treatment of this film were the following: once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a king. And the king was rich and powerful, and he was getting richer every day. Meanwhile, his people were living in poverty, and people were losing hope, and there was no possibility of change. And then one day, a guy decided he was going to change all that. And so he put on a backpack and he went on Facebook Live, and he said that despite the odds, he was going to change everything. And so for me, from the very beginning, and the way I've chosen to live my life in Armenia, and the way we've all chosen to make this film, is almost like a political fairy tale. And I hope the magic quality that it has, and I know that the magic quality that it has been able to cross boundaries and touch hearts wherever we've been able to present the film. And I do hope that with the support of the people who are engaging with us today, who are watching the film today, we will be able to get this film to touch the hearts of millions of people across the world.
Great answer. There is a question which is, what is the most rewarding moment in making the film? So maybe each panelist can answer that question. That's an audience question. Most rewarding moment in making the film.
I'll speak first because my answer is going to be the least honest. And it's going to be for the purpose of, for me personally, I think something that also relates to the question you just asked before, Joe. I was very, very excited when we were able to secure an interview with the ousted president, Serge Sarkisian. I don't think that it's very common in political documentaries to be able to get the quote unquote the other side, the antagonist, to sit down and give you a candid interview. The only interview he gave really for the first, until very recently, to any kind of public, to anybody. And the fact that we got that, the fact that he, credit to him for trusting Godin and us as storytellers, even though he knew we were on the other side and we were sympathetic to the revolution. I think the fact that we got that really bolsters the longevity of this film, the endurance of this film as a real story with both sides, one that without being fake objective, it presents the other side, and it presents the lingering sensation that you never know when you might be wrong. So I think for me, I was proud that we could tell such a complete story and not get carried away with our own euphoria. So I just wanted to add that.
Cool. Serge, how about for you?
Yeah, to me, and there are so many incredible moments, and Alec mentioned one earlier saying, the first time you saw an audience's reaction, it was at TIFF in Toronto, and seeing the audience reaction to the film was really incredible, and seeing people engage with it and all of that. But that's not fair, because that's not making of the film. I had a double honor in this film of not only helping its insemination, but also doing the music to it. So I got to jam to all the scenes. And for me, that was incredible, because I almost was able to, really focus on each part of the story in a way where I could kind of see the depth of what happened. I mean, the magical fable that Godin described, see how it happened, how these 12 revolutionaries, almost like Jesus and the 12 disciples, started this crazy, campaign, this walk from one part of the country to another, and kind of really understanding and digesting the importance of the story. And I was able to do music to it, along with Godin, working with Godin more than once on a number of films from 1915 to later Truth to Power after this film. And with you, Joe, I really feel like I'm blessed, because, I've never, been part of the filmmaking process, and it was my first, and it just kind of happened. And because I was there during the revolution, at the tail end of the revolution, and, I gotta say, more than the film, seeing people elated, I've never seen that much elation in people. I'm not saying happy, I'm saying elation. There's a huge difference. It's a leap. The kind of elation that you feel as if you're emancipated from a forced destiny that you don't want. I saw that on the streets in Armenia. I'll never forget that. That's a once in a lifetime thing that you see as a human being. And that is what's in this film. That moment is in this film that makes it really magical. Yeah.
Godin?
Before I'm a filmmaker, I'm a writer. I think I've always been a writer, and I've always believed in the power of words. And it was so touching and profound for me to track that faith, even in the way the revolution and the film was constructed. What was so fascinating to me was that this entire revolution was actually began from a poem, where the protagonist of the film, in the great hopelessness of being Armenian and the great impossibility of change, is actually struck with the idea of sitting at his kitchen table and writing a poem. And so Nikol Pashinyan sits down at the beginning of the film, and this poem comes to him, and he starts writing, today I take my step today. And it goes on, and the refrain of that poem, which becomes the song, which becomes the anthem of the revolution, is, of course, I'm not alone, not alone, not alone. And of course, when he wrote that poem, and as he started to walk across Armenia, he was very much alone. but he believed in those words so much, and he said them so much and repeated them so much until they came to life. And words have a way of doing that. In my very long interview with the protagonist, Nikol Pashinyan, almost an entire hour of that interview was actually dedicated to me and him just talking about this poem and the process of writing this poem. Now, you won't see this in the movie except for maybe, 20, 30 seconds in which he's talking about the poem. But we went through kind of analyzing each sentence, each rhyme of the poem. And it really occurred to me that Nikol himself, before being a politician, was a writer. And it became very clear that only when he had perfected this poem did he realize that the revolution was possible. In other words, the fact that this poem worked, the fact that this poem was realized, was an almost mathematical proof and a vision of how the revolution was going to go down. And I think, struggle is a lonely thing. You live in a country, you live in a struggle, you give decades of your life to something that nobody believes in, that even people very close to you try to talk you out of, say it's unrealistic, but you keep this faith. You keep this faith, and you're consistent in that faith, and you imagine, and you're imagining a world that's different, and very few people share or believe in what you're imagining. But when you imagine it so clearly, and you put it into words so clearly, and if you can see its every detail, you can begin to bring it to life. And I think the fact that we were able to do that in Armenia, and the fact that we were able to do that through our film, has been the redemption and the validation and the reward of a lifetime.
Great. And Eric, anything to add here about?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that, for me, as somebody who doesn't live in Armenia, is very proud of my Armenian heritage, but hasn't been connected to any type of politics. I think it was important for me that the film ultimately accurately capture what actually happened, especially from a documentary standpoint. And I think, showing all these different viewpoints was really important. And, I remember you and I discussed that quite a bit about other films, particularly Intent to Destroy. How do you not become part of the story? How do you, try to objectively capture and convey what has actually happened, particularly in a documentary? So, and honestly, that was the most rewarding, to be able to look back and say, we did that. And then secondly, just working with people that you trust and admire and enjoy spending time with. Life is too short.
Indeed. Somebody is asking about the Armenian Genocide, specifically that's the one thing that people seem to know about Armenians and not much else, that there was a genocide. So does the genocide factor into this story, is the question.
Serge, do you want to take that, or Eric?
That's a good question. Does the genocide factor in? I mean, the genocide factors in the story in a number of ways. First of all, the day that marks the genocide is April 24th, and the main revolutionary, Nikol Pashinyan, who's the prime minister of Armenia now, he was in jail, and because they had basically taken him off the streets. I mean, I don't want to give the film away, obviously, but April 24 had a lot to do, because that was the date where a lot of Armenians go to Armenia to commemorate the genocide committed by Ottoman Turkey 105 years ago. And it put a lot of pressure on the regime, on the president at the time, because there were going to be a lot of people, and there's this revolution going on. How do we deal with it? It put a lot of time pressure, I think. So it's interesting. A negative event from the past, a very negative event, created some type of pressure on the oligarchic regime to eventually resign and give up, because knowing that that was going to be part of the consciousness of the world at the time, and bringing light to what was going on the streets in Armenia during the revolution. So that's one part of it. And look, the genocide is an inherent consciousness part of every Armenian around the world, because during the genocide there were 3 million Armenians and 1.5 million perished. And so we've all had relatives. All 4 of my grandparents are survivors of the genocide. And so it's part of our DNA. And so until, I'm proud to say that in the United States, Congress last year properly recognized, both houses recognized the genocide, along with many countries in the world. And yet the government of Turkey has still not only denied its past, but is continuing to deny the genocide even till today, and and brutally, helped Azerbaijan attack and kill Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. Obviously, we're not going to try to get political here, but the genocide is a part of everything that we do. We can't help it.
Great answer. Somebody is also now asking about the role of social media in the revolution. Maybe you guys can talk about that. Karin.
Yeah. The truth is, this is one of the rare films this year, or in recent memory, that has a kind of a positive, triumphant role for social media. I mean, obviously, we know very well by now of its dangers and perils, but in this case, this was very much a revolution that would have been impossible in the age before social media. And one of the reasons that it did succeed was because Facebook allowed the movement and the leaders of the movement to break through what had until then been a total information blockade, government-controlled television, radio, and everything else, and to communicate directly to people. So the success of the revolution can actually be measured through the number of views and likes that the live Facebook videos of the participants in the revolution were getting, from just a few hundred well into the millions over the course of 40 days. So again, a positive film for social media.
Cool. Someone is asking a very specific question. The key to the victory was nonviolence. Did Gene Sharp's manuals on nonviolence help empower their effective use of nonviolence?
I'll jump in on this one too, and just to say, this was something that was very interesting to me, and I interrogated so many members of the movement about the books they'd read or the films they'd seen or what they'd inspired, and you did get different sources of inspiration from different people, from Gandhi to Martin Luther King to maybe some of these more kind of technical manuals. But the truth is that, especially from the perspective of Nikol Pashinyan, he admitted that he kind of wanted to. First of all, he'd read all these books and he'd seen all these films, and he was definitely inspired by world leaders. But to say that he was putting into practice any principles that he'd read kind of didn't ring true for him. And I spent a lot of time trying to see if any kind of real research had been done. I think a lot of it was intuitive, and I think a lot of it was actually learned from lessons in previous struggles in Armenia. So, for example, when your protest movement is violent, you lose the moral edge. When you are the first person to strike at a police officer, immediately you lose, and that was part of the brilliance of Martin Luther King, for example, who believed that through nonviolent resistance, you could create a crisis of conscience amid the population, when in seeing a peaceful human being being brutalized, the conscience of that person would be struck. So the lesson of nonviolence was also given to the Armenians by Armenians through the less successful struggles until that point. Another very important lesson and a very important technique, and I think a very underrated one, was the spirit of fun, the spirit of games, the spirit of democracy being a playground. Previous movements in Armenia had always kind of expected citizens to be in kind of this somber commitment to higher ideals, which is of course there, and of course that's the source of all things. But what was unique about this particular movement and why it was so successful is because it allowed people, especially the youth, especially college students, to have fun, to block streets in peaceful ways, to organize soccer games and concerts in the middle of intersections while blocking, major boulevards. So the idea that on any given day, you could just go out into the street and have fun with your friends while also paralyzing the entire political structure of the country was an important technique. And, in analyzing and looking at other movements across the world, you realize, of course, that this isn't unique, that in different circumstances, different people have stumbled upon similar keys, that it's actually sometimes through humor, through fun, through games, through adventure, and of course, also through commitment and also through dedication that you can bring down the regime.
Great. Someone is asking, what films did you look at to kind of have a pathway to making this film, or, that inspired you, or were there other media, did you look at anything before you kind of tackled this project to kind of inspire you?
I love so many films, but I think, again, this is a film that Armenians have been kind of writing for a very long time. And, I have about 12 hard drives, by the way, that are full of protest movements from across the years that essentially were films that never found their third act. So in a weird way, the drafts, like the failed drafts of this film, were being created for maybe the last 20 years. And so I think it was more a matter of an entire people honing in on what this revolution was supposed to look like. There are a lot of course, films that we love and were inspired by, but I think this revolution kind of wrote itself.
And someone made the comment, there's a lot of, documentaries have never been more popular, and there's a lot of big, highly financed documentaries, and this is a labor of love. So, how does a small labor of love, compete and get out there when there's like a lot of, big name documentaries? Has it been a challenge to get the film out there?
Well, I guess this is my territory to say yes. Of course, it's been a great challenge, and the answer to how much can be achieved as a lone wolf is going to be answered maybe in the next few weeks, as various award voters make their decisions. We're trying our best. Basically, what you need to have is a unquestionably wonderful film, and one that above all audiences connect to even more than jury members and all that. And we have that. It has become increasingly difficult, let's say compared to 5 years ago, to get a film that doesn't have a major kind of a brand name to it, whether that brand name is a particular celebrity who's featured in the film, or a very well-known country like, let's say, Syria, or something that's strongly represented in the American news cycle. It's very hard to get a film about Armenia, which few people know about at all, and not that long ago, few people even knew existed, to be taken seriously by various large distributors. So that struggle we're trying to prove in the process of this effort that it is possible for a wonderful film with nothing behind it from a corporate standpoint to make a splash at the highest level. And I hope that those who've seen the film and who can be influential in that regard throw their weight around a little bit. I think, we're all very optimistic, and we have certain possibilities in the air. And obviously COVID has complicated everything up to this point, but we're not going to give up. And there's something about this movie that feels like it cannot be repressed, no matter what the circumstances tell us. So TBD.
I want to add to that, Joe. I would say that, there's a lot of good films that are coming out. Obviously, this year, this film is incredibly special. I would put it, hands down, I would put it against any film. Any audience that sees this film is going to be changed. I will guarantee that. Because just personally, in my lifetime, I'm 53 years old, and being parts of film, scoring for film, seeing films, as an avid film goer, this is a special once in a lifetime type of film. So there you go.
And how can I'd be remiss if I didn't ask how can people who are watching us now help with the campaign to get this film seen? Where can they go if they haven't seen the film? Where can they keep up with the news about the film?
First thing they can do is they can go to our website, iamnotalonefilm.com, and sign up to our email list. That's a good way to keep up with the news of our release and our awards and all that, and as things develop. So I'd encourage everyone to do that. If you're, of course, I don't think we're allowed to lobby any Academy voters, but the film is available until Thursday night, until Thursday 11:59 p.m. Central Time on the Milwaukee Film Club's platform. Mainly it's been on there for about a week, and it's mainly for the purpose of award season. I'm trying to see what the URL is to that, but if you go to our, I think if you go to the main page,
it's mkefilm.org, mkefilm.org/I am not alone. And yeah, so the film will be there for a couple more days. But Alec, keep going.
Yeah, so those are two things you can do, and ultimately, if you're watching this, you're probably a filmmaker, you're probably in the film world. Spread the word. A word of mouth is everything. It's been everything for us so far, and I think we've seen it go pretty far. We've gotten a lot of surprising, very interesting people reaching out to us out of the ether because someone told them to see the film somewhere, and they somehow saw it, or they went to Palm Springs Film Festival, wherever. Like, somehow people have been reaching us from all over ever since the film first started hitting the festival. So just spread the word and make sure that this thing is not lost, because we don't want the story to be lost. Just apart from the film itself, we don't want the story to ever be lost. It's way too valuable to be lost.
Okay, we have time for a couple of more questions. So I think we'll wrap up at 7 p.m. Eastern here. So somebody's asking, are there any moves to create a curriculum for the students and young people in conjunction with the film? I think it would be fabulous, and there's a lot to learn from this event in history and the positive use of social media, as well as the success of nonviolence.
Yeah, for sure, we're going to have an educational component to our distribution when it finally, when schools are finally operating again. I think that's going to move a little faster. So we're definitely going to work on that. I think that's very important. A lot of different departments at university have already reached out to us, especially poli-sci departments, all kinds of departments, anyone that's concerned with peace and conflict. It's a no-brainer. So we will be doing all that. If you yourself are part of some organization or university where you think that an educational screening might be viable, feel free to reach out to us at the email on our website, and we'll figure it out. That's going to be a big part of it for sure. There's no question that from an educational standpoint, because it's such a fun story and movie, it's a really great vehicle for keeping young people greatly engaged in this kind of thing.
Cool. And someone is asking about, Serge, your process in composing versus other type of music you write.
Yeah, I mean, composing is different, obviously, compared to songwriting. You are trying to understand the emotions of the film, the direction of the director, the producers, whoever you're dealing with on a creative level, and trying to create the same type of emotional arc as the story arc. And you know, I don't know how to explain my process without getting technical. It's really literally starting from the beginning and going till the end and making adjustments all the way to make sure that the whole team is very happy, and most importantly that it works. There's a lot of upbeat music in this film, like a lot of positive upbeat music, which surprisingly is actually mixed pretty high as far as, you know, I'm concerned. And it really works for the film, for the movement, because the whole thing starts with a walk, you know, and there's rhythm, there's motion to it, and the music has to complement that and reach kind of like the epic plateaus emotionally of the revolution and the people's, you know, emotional kind of elation. So this film was really, you know, to me, it was such a strong film, and I wanted to make sure that it really had the best soundscape for it, musical soundscape for it, and working with Garin and, you know, sending cues to everyone to kind of get their feedback. It's been incredible.
Cool. And compared, this is my question, compared to like another kind of film project, the fact that this is about your country and a revolution in your country, is that intimidating in some way? Because you really have to step up and, you know, knock it out of the park. You know what I mean? Because it's like an important subject. So I'm just curious how the subject matter being so near and dear to you, how does that impact the composing process, you know?
Yeah, there's a detachment, I think, when I start composing, that I want to feel the emotions of the film and not my own, in a way, if that makes any sense. So I try to do that so that I can kind of best represent the film without me getting into it as much. But again, you can't help it, whether it's on your film Intent to Destroy or on, you know, I Am Not Alone. There's a lot of emotion because you're in it, you know. I'm literally in it too as a talking head in both of them. But you know, but your emotions are in it, and yeah, there's a certain aspect of extra carefulness to make sure that everything works right. But when it works, it's obvious, it's intuitive, and as a filmmaker, I think you'll agree that when something locks in, you know it, you don't have to question it so much. And, you know, ultimately it's about knowing that you've done your best and making the director happy, and knowing that you're doing a good job for the film.
Cool. All right. So the last question that someone is asking is actually a perfect way to end this, which is, you know, what's the takeaway? What do you want people to take away from this film? You know, when they see it, what do you want them to feel? And before you answer that, I just want to thank once again No Studios for hosting this. It's been amazing, and Milwaukee Film for making the film available for another couple of days. Anyone else we should thank, guys, before we answer that last question?
Thank everyone for tuning in.
Of course, everyone who tuned in. So anyway, what's the ideal takeaway on this film? You know, given the times we're in and all that.
Let me start. Nothing is hopeless. You know, the film is a perfect example of the victory of the human spirit over all odds. And, you know, and nothing is hopeless, no matter what the condition is, no matter what the opponent has, what type of, you know, odds are against the underdog. If you have, you know, if you really believe, and you can inspire other people to believe, everything is possible. We've seen it in many countries. We see it in our age today, and it's just a great reminder of the, you know, the victory of the human spirit against all odds.
To piggyback off of that, the answer that I always have given when asked this at the festivals before COVID has seemed to take on greater urgency after the last 9 months have completely atomized most of us and isolated us and taken away a lot of our businesses and opportunities and kind of patterns of life that were maybe operating for us in a good way or in a mediocre way. And a lot of people are like at a loss right now, at a major loss, and they don't know how they're going to get out of it. And there's a moment in the film, which is my favorite line in the movie, where the protagonist, Nicole, has arrived at Yerevan from his march. Nobody has shown up. Practically nobody has shown up to his calls for a big rally. It seems like this is going to be another failed protest movement in a history of failed protest movements. And the only question is how he's going to save face. And he's sitting with a depressed Armenian look, his face hanging down at the square in Armenia. And we hear him say, but there must be a step. There must always be a step we can take to conquer this moment and to find a path. There must be a step. And there is a step. There always is a step. And I can't, politically, Serge has spoken to what that step might be and what has been working so well and what the people in this movie happened upon, which follows that moment, and which is better seen than even described. But at the individual level, at the level of you sitting alone in your apartment right now and for the last 9 months, and whatever your situation might be, there is a step. It's just a matter of having the endurance, the stamina, and the courage to find it before you give up. So I think that message is the permanent one.
Eric?
I appreciate all of these comments. I'll say that, for me, I feel like for Armenia, this goes back a little bit to the genocide question. This is a nation, a global nation that has suffered for centuries. And the past century has not been kind to Armenia. But this is a moment of hope that I think a lot of people can kind of look back to, even despite what's happened recently in Armenia, and I think hopefully it'll motivate people. You have ideas, you have talent, you have skills. Figure out what you can do to give back to your community, whatever that community is. This doesn't apply to Armenia. This is just like an interesting story, I think, for all groups of people. And I think taking that inspiration with you after you watch and then applying it, whatever you can in your own life, whether it's as Alec mentioned, pandemic has devastated communities in the world. Maybe it's your business, maybe it's your team, maybe it's your family. That's what I take away from it.
And I'll just conclude with, I think, the most obvious phrase that brings us all together, and it's the phrase that defines the whole movie, and it's right there, on the poster. It was the line that the protagonist wrote down, and it's the faith that we all have to remind ourselves of, even in our darkest moments, in our various cities across the world, in our own very lonely versions of struggle, whether that's in our schools or in our communities. Whatever version of that lonely struggle we're in, whenever it's darkest, whenever all the odds are stacked against you, at the very precise moment where you feel the loneliest, you have to know that you're not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. And if you believe that, and if you take that step, as Alec says, if you take that step, people will join you. And the miracle is much closer than you think. So thank you, Joe. Thank you to Eric and Serge and Alec. Thank you to No Studios and Milwaukee Film, and to the audience members today. It really means a lot to us that you connected to us today and got to hear our story. And hopefully we'll watch our film or have watched our film. And we hope that you will share with your circles and with the world around you the big miracle that our little nation was able to perform. And I hope that message continues to travel across the world and to inspire people across the world. Thank you all so very much.
Beautifully put, and thanks for having me. Anyone else want to say anything before I go have dinner with my lovely wife, Lauren?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thank you all.